Welcome back to the Empathy Exchange podcast for episode 11 with a guest that we haven't actually met in real life, but we've been connected on social media as well as with mutual clients. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Trish. So let me just share Trish Tutton's bio before we dive into our conversation. After years working in cultures where stress and burnout were seemingly the only way to success, Trish suffered a shocking loss and things became clear. Stress is unavoidable and it doesn't have to dictate our lives. As a speaker and mindfulness teacher, Trish has taught the skills to become unshakable and thrive amidst change and challenge to over 10,000 people across North America. She is passionate about helping folks become more resilient and less stressed with simple but impactful mindfulness techniques. You probably, maybe you know this or maybe you don't, but fun fact, Trish is a teacher on the number one free meditation app in the world, Insight Timer. And she is the author of the Mindful Mornings Journal. Trish, welcome to the Empathy Exchange podcast.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was rereading your bio this morning, and I actually highlighted some of the keywords that jumped out at me, the stress and burnout, which is kind of been that badge of honor that we feel like we've had to wear for years. I love the idea of being unshakable and thriving. And the change and challenge, which when we're looking at seniors care for families and staff, I mean, that's an everyday thing. And I'm excited for you to be able to share how we can become more resilient and less stressed. And so I thought I'd love for you to start talking, just sharing a little bit about the work that you're doing. And it sounds like the secret sauce approach that you've got.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned in my bio, I have this kind of combination of a background of, I was kind of building my career and I was working in not-for-profit events coordination. I really wanted a job that gave me purpose and I felt like I was really being of service. And then alongside that, kind of parallel to that, I was studying mindfulness and meditation and these, really simple actionable techniques that can actually support us. And so I really was, again, on this kind of career path where I was seeing the reality of burnout and stress and people struggling and people overwhelmed and anxious. As a side note, I learned later on, after I was finished in my not-for-profit career, I learned that event coordination, which was kind of the realm I was in, is in one of the top 10 most stressful
Oh,
jobs.
no.
So it's kind of not surprising now that I've left that and realized I'm going to help people manage that stress. But I really just was seeing the really negative effects, for folks personally and professionally. And I was starting to feel it myself too, as I was building my career. And so yeah, I realized I had this tool, that you can really apply very simply in your life to help you to navigate stress without it, like you said in my bio, without it dictating your life. And I
Mhm.
guess what I mean by that is just that our whole lives can kind of center around stress. Like it, can cause us to struggle to fall asleep or stay asleep. Then we wake up, now we're irritable because we didn't have a good night's sleep. Then we spill our coffee and we get even more irritable. And then our, kid brings home a test that we need to sign and it's like a D minus. And then we're even more, and it just is this ripple effect and we're reactive and we're frustrated. And one of my clients one time, she said, I feel like I walk around irritated.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was and it just resonated with the whole room. And I share it now. It's kind of like, you go to cook dinner and you preheat your oven. It's like that, but we just move around our lives pre-irritated because we're not really managing and coping with our stress. So yeah, I'm just really passionate about sharing these really simple tools that come from mindfulness traditions that really is thousands of years old, that are really easy ways for us to start to cope. And I end up working in a lot of high stress industries as a result, industries that like the ones you really land in and speak to, healthcare and seniors care, people who are literally dealing with folks well-being in their lives. And then other high stress industries too. I find myself working in just industries who are dealing with a lot of change, a lot of challenges, and just helping them to navigate that with more skills, more tools, and more ease.
Hmm. So, the work that you've done within seniors care, I'm sure you've had many conversations with people working in seniors care. How would you describe what they're sharing or expressing with you, and what your approach has been to help give them some of that relief?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say what I've learned, through COVID, I really started to work a lot in healthcare and then specifically seniors care and long-term care. And what I've learned about that industry is, I mean, it really is, it's kind of a no-brainer when you think about it. You've got people dealing with people's lives and people's lives in a really pivotal moment, often of change. And it's not necessarily, or upon first blush, it's negative change, it's unpleasant change. It's, I mean, you think about how our culture overall paints aging. It's
Mhm.
not very positively. And then, folks are dealing with health issues and things like this too. So you're really meeting people, folks who are working in this industry, in a moment of change that is really quite quickly deemed as something that's negative. You're dealing with people in this dramatic change moment of their life. And if there's one thing we know about change, it really is kind of the root of stress for a lot of people. And stress is a word we throw around a lot. But what it really means, it's just really the unpleasant side effects, whether that's physical, you could think about like knots in your shoulders or TMJ issues, grinding your teeth, whether it's emotional, right? Feelings of grief or anxiety or worry, or mental, again, those kind of, spinning stories we have in our mind, those anxious thoughts, those worries as well. Stress is really those unpleasant side effects of something happening, which is usually involved in change, right? Something changing in a way that we don't actually want it to be changing, right? Maybe things have been good for us and they're changing negatively, or even sometimes when things change negatively to positive, that also creates a lot of stress for us. So I think, not only are the families, the kind of clients in long-term care experiencing change, and then you've got the staff members too, right? There's a lot of staff shortages I hear that are going on. There's just a lot of changing in, regulations and different things in the industry that creates a lot of upheaval for folks. So I think to kind of put that all under an umbrella, it's just like the stakes are high. The stakes are high in this industry and people know it. And that creates emotions that are high, right? And reactions that are high, and a lot of investment, emotional and mental, that we have into this. So, really, what I'm teaching people is just not how to delete their stress, not how to, we wish we could do that. We
Mhm.
wish. I think sometimes people reach out to me and they're like, this is the magic eraser for stress. And it's not, unfortunately. Bad news is it's not. Stress, I often like to say, no matter where it's coming from. So we've identified where it often comes from in seniors care and in long-term care industry. But no matter where that stress is coming from, it's something that we have to cope with the effects of. And it's kind of like, do you know if you've ever been, or any of your listeners have ever been to like a fair or a carnival, and they have that game whack-a-mole,
Mhm.
where the little things like pop up and you're trying to whack them all down, and the goal is to get them all down at once. Stress is kind of like that, because you could literally focus on just one of those holes where the mole keeps popping up, one of your stressors. You could take one and you could say, I'm going to, for the next year of my life, focus on getting rid of this stressor. You could put all of your effort, all your energy into it, and you'd probably succeed, actually. But another one is going to pop up over here. That's really just the reality of life, right? Whether you work in seniors care, wherever you work,
Mhm.
that's just the reality. So, what can we do? We can't magically erase it, but we can, resource ourselves with tools and techniques to help us to really not have to have all that residue of stress with us constantly every day.
I think sometimes we have this expectation of instant gratification,
Yeah.
or read this book and do these 6 things and your life is going to be magical. And what I'm hearing from you is that it's a bit of a yes and. The stress and challenges and change are going to be a constant.
Yes.
And it's almost like being able to embed these tools in amongst your day. And I think one of the which I'm sure you're going to have some great perspectives on, it's when we catch ourselves having a disproportionate reaction. And I love the expression of the pre-irritation.
Yes.
Like, that is brilliant to be able to recognize, am I going into this conversation
Yeah.
pre-irritated,
Yeah.
because then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But
Yes.
it's the how we catch ourselves in the moment when we can start to feel ourselves unravel, feel reactive. And, I think one of the powers of the reset that I'd love to get your thoughts on, because, in my first book, I wrote about that reset and shake it off,
Mm.
but we don't always think to do that because we're going from meeting to meeting, or a family member is driving home from work and rushing into the
We're
home to
busy.
visit their mom, and right, and then we're kind of on autopilot.
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh, I have great thoughts on this. Okay. So, yeah, there's something to be said, first of all, about the kind of race we're running in life, right? That we don't give ourselves the time and the space. But one of the things that I often share as a reset, which is really, of all the things I teach, this is the thing that people will come back to me and be like, that thing changed my life. That literally changed the way I navigate stress and the way I deal with challenges and difficulties. So this is, again, it's a mindfulness teaching. It comes from thousands of years ago. I didn't make this up. I'm just a teacher of it, but it's called the 2 arrows teaching. And the idea with the 2 arrows teaching is this. If you were to get struck, like an arrow, like a bow and arrow, like somebody shot you with an arrow, with one arrow, again, this is really showing the thousands of years of this thing, but it still applies. So if you were to get shot with one arrow, would it hurt? Would that be painful? Real question.
I would think so.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Now,
But is this a trick question,
no,
Trish?
no. And this is so funny. I always say to people, this is not a trick question. It's very literal. If then, so you have one arrow stuck in your right leg, and now somehow it's the worst day of your life, the most unlucky day of your life. Now you have a second arrow that just got shot into your left leg. Would you be in more pain or less pain than the
I
first
would
arrow?
think more pain.
More pain. Now both legs are just, aching and throbbing. Okay. So this is an analogy. So the first arrow is simply the fact that life, yes, life includes joys and happiness, and beautiful things happen to us and we have great days. And the first arrow is just the fact that we all get struck with first arrows in life. Life can be painful, right? The aging process can be painful. Losing people we love can be painful. Change, as we already talked about, sometimes even when we see it as positive, it's painful. And especially when we identify it as negative, it's painful. Even just things like our bodies ache or we get sick, like this is the first arrow in life. And we can't control this. There's no way anybody can live their lives avoiding first arrows. The second arrow, though, is the arrow that we can control. So a simple example of this is, you've got let's take a staff member who's working in long-term care, and they've got a meeting the next day, and they know it's with a family member who's like often just really difficult. Okay, that's the first arrow. It's kind of inevitable. You have to have this meeting. They're a client. You just got to show up. The second arrow is that staff member laying in bed the night before, playing out in their mind all the different scenarios. What are they going to say? How badly is it? How angry are they going to get? How frustrated are they going to get? What is my boss going to think of that? And how am I going to handle it? And then as soon as they know it, they look at the clock and it's 4 a.m. and they haven't slept and they just are full of these spinning thoughts and anxiety. That's the second arrow. And it's more painful. It amplifies the pain of that stress. And it's actually the one we shoot at ourselves. And so, a really simple way of resetting is really just recognizing, like when we, name something. So, when we've named this idea, the two arrows, right? That the inevitable pain we experience in life, and then the pain that we amplify and we keep dwelling on it and worrying about it and agonizing over it. When we label it in that way, we can be more aware that we're doing it, right? So we're on a drive home and we notice, oh, wow, I can't stop repeating that thought over and over and over about that negative interaction I had with my colleague, with that family member, whatever, you name it. At least we have a moment of awareness. Oh, I'm shooting myself. I'm turning up. I like to think of it like, you get in your car and your favorite song comes on. You want to turn it up because you want to enjoy it. But if your least favorite song came on, you're not going to turn it up. You're going to change the station. The second arrow, this dwelling and agonizing, it's like us turning up the volume on that least favorite song of ours. And we're just amplifying the stress, right? It's like, one of my teachers one time said to me, did you have a stressful day, or did you have a stressful 20 minutes, hour, that you replayed over and over and over in your head all day? And it felt like your whole day was stressful when really there was a couple moments. So as soon as we notice, oh, wow, there it is. There's the second arrow. Then as a reset, even a simple way of resetting that I invite people to practice is to ask themselves, and folks who are listening right now could actually do this. They could ask themselves, what is here right now? What is here right now? And then what you do is you kind of tune into your senses. So I'll even just do it as an example. So what is here right now? So I'm noticing that a feeling that's here right now is I get excited when I talk about this stuff. I feel energized. I feel like someone's plugged me in and I'm just, energized and inspired. Another thing I was just noticing, it's snowing, as we mentioned before we started recording, and I could hear a snow removal, engine. There's some equipment out there happening in my complex. And I'm also noticing, because I'm talking a lot, my mouth is a little dry. So those three things that I just noticed, just by asking what is here right now, that took my mind, if I had been shooting second arrows, that took my mind from putting attention on all those worries, fears, anxious thoughts. It took my mind right here.
Mm-hmm.
Where actually, when we are able to orient our mind to the moment that we're in, we usually have this aha moment clarity that we're like, oh, wait, my life is actually not as big of a catastrophe as my thoughts were making it out to be, right? My thoughts were all this catastrophe. What am I going to do? And what if this happens? And why did that happen? And why couldn't I change it? And what if, and what if, and what if? It's like, oh, wait, I'm right here. I can feel a few things happening. I can hear something. I can see something. All right, here I am. It's actually, things are okay right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. And as you were describing that, the word rumination comes to mind.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's those of us who probably have a PhD in rumination and that 4
That's a
a.m., right?
lot.
Well, we develop that rut. And when I think about particularly the relationship with staff and families,
Yeah.
and that staff member worrying about the difficult family relationship and needing to have that conversation, and perhaps whether it be previous experiences with that particular family or other family, then
Mhm.
they're creating the story in their head
Ding, ding.
and playing through, well, and then I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, and then the tossing and the turning. And usually, not always, but usually I've found situations aren't nearly as bad as we expect them to be. So then all of that wasted energy. And then on the other side of that is the family who probably is also ruminating
Yeah.
and not looking forward to going in and having this conversation. Because as you said, it's high stakes and if there's something going on that they're upset about. And then you've got all of this energy having been expended,
Mhm.
usually because of miscommunication, misunderstanding,
Mhm.
their expectation and reality wasn't aligned, and for
Mhm.
all of these different things. And a whole strategy around somebody can go down the road of, okay, I'm going to have to learn the 8 best ways to have a non-confrontational conversation. And yet what you're saying is that a little thing that we can do is just ground ourselves,
Yeah.
and it doesn't make the necessity of that conversation go away. But at least if you're able to get the sleep that you need and put it in perspective,
Yeah.
which is what you're describing, is all within our control.
That's right. That's right. And you mentioned this idea of the stories, right? But that's what our thoughts are. Our thoughts are stories. Those second arrows are stories. So that's even a next step to go to. Once you've recognized, oh, I'm doing the rumination thing, ground myself in the present, we can then just invite ourselves to use that whole Brene Brown, the story I'm telling myself is, right? And maybe the story I'm telling myself is, maybe this family member, I'm telling myself a story that they don't think I'm doing a good job. They don't appreciate the work we do. They don't like me personally. They, aren't on board, whatever it is. And those things might be true. They may be, but there also is so many other things that might be true. So many. So that perspective too. And, like you said, if both parties are doing this, up late, not sleeping, kind of tying themselves mentally into knots, creating all this tension, then you've got two parties that come to the table pre-irritated.
Yeah.
How do we think that interaction is going to go, right? The better thing we would be suggested to take our time doing is that self-regulation, is calming our nervous system, is taking some time to really relax and rest and care for ourselves, so that then you've got two parties coming to the table to have a tough conversation perhaps, but they're both coming from a place of presence, of having given some thought to their own stories they're telling themselves and their relative truths, and they're coming to the table, I would say, in a more generous way, ready for a more authentic conversation, instead of just, I want my side of the story to be heard and I'm defensive, and right, instead of bringing all that baggage.
Well, the other thing that comes to mind as you're describing that is the power of curiosity, because I think sometimes in the rumination, we're wondering, how could this go wrong?
Yeah.
What could go wrong with this? And we don't tend to think about what could go right.
That's right. So the interesting thing in, this situation, let's say it's, a new family member, and their family member is now being put into retirement care, long-term care, whatever that looks like. Again, it's this time in life that is full of uncertainty. And our human brain, with its negativity bias, with its, bias towards survival and wanting to make sure everything goes well, we see uncertainty as a negative thing. And even that word, right, is kind of has a negative connotation. But you think about a synonym for uncertainty is possibility. Possibility. So that's something that even I will work with myself. And when I'm navigating some sort of change and my mind is just doing that thing where it's like, what if this happens? What if that happens? It's really stuck to the negative outcomes of uncertainty. It's like, can I even just plant a seed? Honoring the fact that maybe I'm feeling scared or anxious or nervous or fearful. That's totally normal and human for us to feel that. Can I even plant the seed of what might be possible here? What also might be possible in this uncertain future? Because if we really want to be honest with ourselves, when we think about that things are uncertain and we don't know how things will play out, well, then there's actually kind of an equal chance that things will play out negatively and positively. So what if we take a moment to think about, what might actually be a positive benefit of this change?
Well, and sometimes when you think about from a service recovery standpoint,
Hmm.
when we are able to meet the situation and have a conversation that's productive, we
Yeah.
may be able to break through some of the limiting beliefs or narratives and clear the air and clarify that, and actually earn respect from the other person to
Yes.
then be able to, if we can overcome this challenge, what else can we do together? As someone who, there must be a lot of pressure on you as a mindfulness expert. right? The whole walking the talk. And
Yeah.
when I think about mindfulness, and you described it quite well in that metaphor, is presence.
Yeah.
And I sign off my podcast with "There's power in your presence, so make your presence matter," because I really do believe, and it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
That something that doesn't cost any more time or money, but to use the power of our presence. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you leverage that superpower.
And even before I go into that, I'll just say, I love that you say it doesn't cost us any time. And I would even argue, I'd even go further. I'd say it gives us time, right? It really gives us time back. Like, maybe not in a literal sense of like adding seconds or minutes or hours or days, weeks to our life, but it adds more quality time, you
Mhm.
know? Like when I think about the benefits of my own practice, and you're right, listen, you're right. I got to walk the talk. It's like, I would be lying if I said sometimes what gets me to sit down and do my meditation practice is the fact that, like, Trish, you got to teach this stuff. So you kind of have to be practicing it. You kind of have to be doing it. So you're right. It does hold me accountable. But one of the things I've noticed, it's not necessarily, again, extending my life, but it's almost like squeezing more juice out of every moment of life I do have, right? Like I just know and I feel that the moments of my life, I'm just more here for them. And I'm experiencing them with more depth and more quality through that practice of presence, which, mindfulness, that word has been overdone. I hear it everywhere, but a really great way for people who, if you're kind of numb to that word, is exactly what you're saying, presence. And I think what occurs to me about this idea of presence is like, it's our ability to actually live our lives. And I think a lot of us think we're living our lives, but I believe what many of us are doing, and I include myself in this too, what we're actually doing is thinking about our lives. We're thinking about them, but we're not necessarily present in that moment, because whatever moment we're in, if we're thinking about the future, well, we're not living that present moment. We're just thinking about what our life is going to be like, next week, when maybe there's something big is coming up that we're nervous about, or maybe something we're excited about and we can't wait. We've got vacation coming and we're thinking and dreaming about it. Well, when we're doing that, we're not actually living our real life, which is actually only here in these moments, right? And I think the other thing that occurs to me about presence, so in that way, that's about us as individuals, right? It's like, am I living my life or am I just thinking a lot about my life? The consequences of either one of those, positive or negative, is really just about the individual. But then we can extrapolate it out that our presence isn't actually just about us, right? Because we know that just as if I yawned right now, the chances that Deborah would yawn as well, because we can see each other, are pretty high. Yawns are contagious.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah. And what's also I'm really good in the morning, so we got a good time. What's also contagious is the way in which, and the quality that we bring to our presence, to our moments, right? So if I show up here, let's just keep coming back to this because it's such a good analogy, pre-irritated, the chances that whoever I'm engaging with in that moment is going to start to feel a little bit of that, like it's contagious, just like if I had a sniffly nose and maybe tomorrow they get a sniffly nose, the chances of them feeling that pre-irritation, that, irritability, that frustration is going to go up. So our presence matters in that way too, not just as a consequence of how we're going to feel, but about what it is we're rippling out into the world, right? So if I have a really stressful, intense, interaction with somebody because I've showed up pre-irritated and they've showed up pre-irritated, and then we irritate each other even more, and then we go off to our respective days and we go grab something in the grocery store and we're short with the cashier, and then we pick up our kid from school and then we're angry at them, or we don't really want to talk, we're not open, and they've got something that's really on their mind that they want to chat with us. It ripples out. So I think remembering that, I'm motivated to practice, yes, because I need to walk my talk, but I'm also motivated in that way, not only for my own quality of life, but for the fact that I know whoever I interact with today is going to ripple out. Whatever it is I brought to that interaction is probably
Mhm.
going to have a ripple effect way bigger than my little microcosm of a life.
It reminds me of the quote from Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote the
Yeah,
book, My Stroke of Insight, that please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this space,
that's right.
right? Because she had suffered a near catastrophic stroke in her 30s and was a brain doctor, right? She was studying strokes.
Mhm.
And she noticed the stroke affected a part of her brain that made her acutely physically sensitive to other people's energy.
I remember that. Yes.
Right? And so this idea that we take responsibility for the energy we bring into this space. I use a visual image of, Pigpen with the residue of all the dust behind him. When we walk into a room with that pre-irritation, if we could see it,
Yeah.
that's
That's
what it
what it
would
was.
look like. And people do feel that, and it doesn't mean that we're gonna get it right all of the
No.
time, but I think that the being aware of and noticing. And the other thing, it's interesting because I do agree that if we spend so much time thinking about the future, it gets away in the way of the present. But I think there's also a way that we can leverage the future.
Mhm.
And in that, I remember my therapist asking me the question when Ty was living in long-term care.
Mm.
She asked me to think ahead to
Mhm.
when Ty would be gone,
Yeah.
and then to come back to the present and say, "What do you want to remember about the time that you're spending with him now? Because there will be a time when he won't be here."
Yes.
And Trish, it was, I mean, talk about an opportunity to really get grounded in the present when I was able to keep that in mind. And I think about families who have loved ones in long-term care. This is typically the last chapter of their loved one's life.
That's right.
And sometimes can get, as I did, the caught up in the visits and the transactions and,
The
the
minutia.
paperwork and all of that.
Yeah.
And yet there are and coming in with that pre-irritation, for whatever reason, because families have lives and
Yeah.
duties and things that they have to take care of,
Sure.
and how much easier it can be in the memories that we can create, but creating memories by really stepping into the present, if that makes sense.
Yes. And what a powerful exercise. And, I think when people know that I'm a mindfulness teacher, I think they may assume that, like, I think that this ability for our mind to look back and look forward is like a bad thing. And it's not. It certainly isn't. You just illustrated a great way to use the fact that our mind can think ahead. That is such a useful way of using the power of our brain to think into the future. The solution that mindfulness solves is like the fact that we often do that on autopilot when we don't want to be thinking about the future, right? When it's like, no, I actually want to be in this present moment, but my mind keeps just doing this thing out of habit. So it can be a really useful thing for our mind to do, and it can be something that our mind does too much, and then it ends up stealing our kind of presence in the moment. But yeah, what a great, what that exercise to me does is it gets you out of the, like, wearing blinders, minutia, daily tasks. Oh, I got to do this, then this, and this, and this. And it gives you a 10,000-foot view, right? Of, like, yeah, how do I want to look back on this time in my life? And probably I would imagine that one of the answers to that is like, well, I want to be present with him when I'm with him, right?
And I would think the same with staff. They when I try to explain to people who've never experienced seniors care, never worked in it, that the care team, they grow to really love and adore their residents.
Yeah.
And they have these magical moments every single day of little 30-second or 2-minute interactions with someone that they have grown to love and they care for, and they see every shift
Yeah.
until they don't.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think for them, sometimes get so caught up in the business of care because that's what they, and the limited time that they have to get all the tasks done. And to
Mhm.
be able to, as a yes and also while doing that, bring that presence, which is such a gift for the resident, but it's also a gift for themselves.
Yeah. Like imagine, you know how I was saying, did you have a stressful day or a stressful 20 minutes that you kept replaying in your head? Like, what if you kept replaying that positive moment in your head? How would that
Yes.
change the way you show up that day? And, a way of, or a word that I often will teach as well, helping people understand, the practice of being present in good moments of our life. Because yes, we all get shot with first arrows. We all experience painful moments, and we all experience really beautiful moments. A word that I'll remind them of, which basically just means being present during a good moment, is savoring. And we might think of savoring as like something we would only do with, I don't know, a treat or a glass of wine or some sort of food or drink, but you can savor good moments in your life,
Mhm.
which basically just means, well, in order for you to savor it, you have to be paying attention, right? Which is also another way of saying mindfulness, that you're paying attention in the moment to what's unfolding. And then savoring is kind of the opposite of ruminating, right? Ruminating being we're dwelling on kind of the unpleasant things. Savoring is like we're dwelling on the good stuff. We're lengthening and we're deepening and we're really feeling into whatever pleasant emotions are arising in that, like you said, maybe it's a little 30-second interaction. Maybe it's something really funny that happens with a resident. Maybe, who knows what it is. Maybe somebody, is expressing their gratitude toward you for the work that you do. So even like a little moment of mindfulness would be like, after that happens, let yourself pause. Let yourself really sense what you're feeling, like the good feeling you have. And it differs for different people, but it's usually a physical sensation. People will say things like, literally, we say like warm hearted. Literally, you'll feel like warmth in your chest, or you'll feel like maybe your neck and shoulders, those knots that have been creeping in lately, maybe they kind of soften in that moment. Or maybe your, the furrow brow thing you have going on most of the day, maybe it softens a little.
Mhm.
And you can literally just stop and take a couple of breaths and, even silently say something in your mind like, that was a really good moment. And then feel the feeling. I like to think of it. I love analogies. So for me, when I practice this, I think about like a sponge soaking something up, like almost like my body is soaking up those good feelings. Or another way I like to think of it, I'm a big tea drinker. I'm not a coffee drinker, but tea steeps, right? You have hot water, you put the tea bag in, and the tea just infuses the water with flavor. So I think about that feeling, or I feel that feeling kind of infusing through the cells of my body. And it is kind of, I talked about turning up the volume on the worst song. It's like turning up the volume on your favorite song, where you're like, oh, this is good. This feels really good. And that little tiny moment, I think we might forget how these little small moments and actions can really amplify our whole day. That could resource you for the next couple hours of your shift, that you're experiencing difficult things and hard moments and tough conversations. That little moment, that amplification of that pleasant feeling can resource you quite a bit.
Mhm. I love that.
Yeah.
And even just what's one thing that I can do as an act of kindness for somebody else, because that comes back to us tenfold.
100%. I mean, in short, I mean, even as simple as just feeling like, oh, I'm the kind of person who does nice things. Like that's a boost of our self-esteem and
Yes.
confidence. Not to mention the fact that people will probably thank you and people will probably, send that back to you. But I
Mhm.
find when you do a good deed and you're like, hey, I'm the kind of person who does a good deed, and that feels good. As silly as it might sound.
Well, exactly. Well, this is I've learned so much, and I'm sure that the listeners have learned so much, and we'll make sure that all of your contact information is in the show notes because you write a great blog with lots of valuable resources and to be able to let people know where to purchase your book. And just thank you so much for your presence
Hmm.
and your mindfulness and the generosity that you have in sharing with your clients and everybody around you. Thank you so much, Trish, for joining me on the Empathy Exchange podcast.
My pleasure. It fills me up to do this work. So, in a way, it feels a little selfish, but I'm glad that it has a positive ripple effect. Thanks for
Yes.
having me.
Thank you. And remember, there's power in your presence. So make your presence matter.